for people who are considering making a pitch with the largest strategic companies that exist, learning from watching somebody else's pitch based on the niche that they're going after in order to be successful. Technology and innovation, very excited to see inventors, investigators, entrepreneurs. That's fascinating, really providing guidance to people and companies and firms and entrepreneurs that want to develop products that address an unmet clinical need. Good evening, everybody. I'm Scott Bruder, and I'm the host of The Pitch. This is going to be an exciting program tonight. So this is how it's going to work. We're going to start with a short video from each of the companies that explains their product, their plans, and you with the audience, you're going to be able to vote after you've heard some of the Q&A from my esteemed panel and colleagues. And finally, if you find any of these companies appealing, whether you're interested in investing or engaging, we'll give you the information to contact the company yourself at the end of each presentation. What if spine surgeons had a way to simplify anterior approach surgery? If they could do that with a simple, single device that's versatile and flexible to accommodate a variety of approaches, anatomic variation, and even intraoperative decision-making that allows for flexibility. That's the idea behind NovApproach. So our first pitch, we'll see the video, and then we'll have Q&A from members of the company led by Ray Cloutier.
So as a surgeon approaching the interbody space, there's a broad spectrum of angles or approaches that we can use. The anti-psoas approach has got some real unique advantages in terms of being able to protect the psoas muscle as well as the femoral plexus within the psoas, and also to work behind the vasculature.
So the supine ATP approach is a concept of keeping the patient on the operating room table supine. When we tilt the table 25 to 30 degrees, left side up, the patient is secured, and now gravitational forces are pulling the intra-abdominal packet towards the ground and allowing the establishment of the retroperitoneal space. When we're done with the exposure and we have our retractor blades engaged and the spine is exposed, the patient will be repositioned in the flat supine 0-degree positioning. Being supine has that benefit of keeping patients in a more neutral, natural position.
Oftentimes in lumbar spine surgery, particularly in cases that can be extremely challenging, the angles with which the surgeon is implanting or fixating the implant often vary tremendously. The NovApproach spine implant is designed and intended to enable a surgeon to place it in a variety of positions and angles.
At some segments, we might be more concerned about our ability to mobilize the vessels. We might be concerned about our ability to come in at the appropriate angle. And with the supine ATP and the one-lift device, we're able to approach the spine from a spectrum of approaches, and we can hone in the right approach and the right angle for the individual segment. It's almost like having segmental control over how we approach the spine, because we can do that differently at each level with the patient in a supine position and using a one-lift device.
And a lot of it depends on the vascular approach. I think we tend not to think about that. There are times where the anatomy doesn't allow us to access things in the same way.
Well, it could be previous abdominal surgery, it could be upper levels, it could be scar tissue, it could be vascular structures that are large or scarred down or calcified that can't be moved. And the beauty of approaching the spine in different corridors is now, as an approach surgeon, I could tailor the approach to the patient.
The versatility of the one-lift implant is something that attracts me. Being able to insert the cage in different positions because of the potential for challenging anatomy, and also to fix it in different positions.
I think that the one-lift implant really gives us the flexibility to insert the inner body from any angle, which is a terrific advantage. And again, being able to vary from segment to segment is a terrific empowerment to the patient to optimize patient safety, to avoid the neural elements at some levels, to avoid the vasculature at other levels.
let's start tonight's question and answer period. Let's start with you, Mike Sherman. Why don't you lead us off in some Q&A here?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming and presenting this. You know, there's a lot of approaches to the spine, especially the front side of the spine, right? We have laterals, we have X-lifts, which is sort of extreme lateral, or sometimes it's a branded version. We have obviously A-lift and oblique. So how does the supine ATP fit in the somewhere between A-lift and oblique, or between A-lift and lateral? Explain to me and the audience what's unique about supine ATP.
Okay, well, first, I want to thank Robin Young and Orthopedics This Week and the sponsors. It's such a privilege to be able to participate in this and have the opportunity. Mike, that's a great question. In fact, I'd like Dr. McMillan, who's been very involved in innovative surgical approaches, to field that question. And he's in an excellent position to talk about the history of different approaches anteriorly and laterally, and why supine ATP is, I think, a significant advance. Dr. McMillan?
Thank you, Raymond. I think the one thing we're bringing to the table is, traditionally, the reason we call it the supine ATP is because it had been done traditionally in the lateral position. So by bringing the patient in the supine position, we're able to access the upper lumbar vertebra, L2-3 and L3-4, through a supine approach. And then what that does is that enables the logistics of approaching L4-5. There's been a traditional approach at L4-5 popularized by Michael Meyer as early as 1997 from the supine position, as well as L5S1. So we've essentially created a surgical position and aligned all of the approaches so that the lumbar surgery actually becomes more like cervical surgery, where you can do all the levels through a single approach and a single position.
Thanks. That's great. So I have another question, and probably, I'm not sure who it's going to be for, Michael, but maybe it's for you. So we just heard a video and we just talked about the approach, and there's a lot of discussion on the approach, but there was no discussion about the implant. Other than, you know, we saw an image of it. It has multiple ways you can use it. But talk to us about the interbody implant.
Dr. McMillan, and then Mike Weavers, if you could follow up, because I think there's both clinical value in the design, but also some marketing advantages. And so, Dr. McMillan?
Well, I think, and I'll be brief so Mike can join in too, but our company was really born out of discussions with access surgeons. And the access surgeons are very sensitive to the fact that the vessel manipulation can vary a lot based on previous surgery, calcifications, vessel anomalies, and often they couldn't move the vessels the way they had. If all you have is an implant that can only be put in straight ahead, there are numerous examples of people having to abandon cases with the patient's incision open because they can't get the implant in. So our implant has a outline and a profile that allows it to be placed in both anteriorly and obliquely. So if you do run into a situation, you have that opportunity to complete the surgery.
Great.
I'll just chime in and say that I think, as was illustrated in the video, some of the most challenging cases are the ones where this implant and the versatility really comes into play. And it was born out of, an initial desire to be able to have an A-lift approach, a traditional A-lift approach, and an ATP approach in the same setting, in the same patient, having an implant born for it. So the unparalleled versatility was what was called for from having an implant that works for dual approaches. Well, what ended up turning out to be the case is the surgeon said that level of versatility is helpful, period. It's just helpful in unusual anatomy, helpful in previous surgery, helpful in levels, helpful in all kinds of situations where the cases are more challenging. So that's what really got the surgeons excited about the implant, was the what was born out of the idea of having something that would be suitable for multiple approaches turned into a level of versatility that excites them for a variety of different kind of cases.
And just to follow up real quick, we have multiple bone screw holes. So doctors always have plenty of choices to put at least 3 bone screws in. They could actually put more, 4 or 5, depending on the access. We did receive standalone clearance for our device in all surgical approaches. And so we're excited about that. So as far as I know, I am not aware of another implant that has as many different fixation options and insertion options with our implant, which is patent pending, has.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mike. Good line of questioning. Let's go to Tony now.
Scott, thank you very much for the opportunity, and congratulations to NovApproach. Can you talk about what your strategy is to develop clinical data to compel access physicians and the spine surgeons the opportunity to use your product?
I think we're fortunate that, first of all, your assessment of where this fits in the spectrum is absolutely the case. It's the more challenging cases that this makes easier, faster, safer. It really falls right into that category. I think that we're also fortunate that a lot of the evidence base for what makes this implant successful are fairly short-term objectives that we are going to be able to use during our beta site stage and our initial launch stage to really validate and establish the value proposition. Because this is an excellent implant for surgeons to choose particular cases. We can actually hone in on a particular patient population and a subset that represents a beachhead from the marketplace standpoint to move forward into, to challenge larger companies that have established relationships and things. So we're real confident that we are going to have a very broad appeal, and our sort of initial recruitment of beta sites has also demonstrated that.
Help me understand how you're going to use clinical data specifically to increase the use of the product. Like, for example, are you planning a clinical trial? Are you going to work with, there are many things you can do. Tell us what your thoughts are.
So we feel like we're pretty confident that we're going to be able to find very nice study opportunities that both, serve for value establishment as well as for popularization, if you will, as well.
So one of the things I'd like to encourage you to consider is getting an indication when you make your regulatory submission that is a unique indication for interbody solutions, and an indication that might make your market smaller, but actually give you something that no one else has. There are more than 60 different interbody fusion devices in the market, well, more than 60. And so for you to compete, I think it would be value added for this to be regulated as a device that's used where there is previous surgery, specifically for that indication that solves some problems. So it's something for you to think about.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate your insightful questions. And I may come back with a question about clinical myself. Let's go to Audrey and hear what you would like to raise with them tonight.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks, Raymond and team. I'm excited to have a chance to see this technology. Raymond and I had a chance to chat about it last year, in fact, earlier this year. So Raymond, I'm going to ask an engineering question. So could you tell me what some of the key hurdles were in the design from the standpoint of, what you're giving up to have all this versatility? What did you have to build into the design that might have had to be different or unique to accommodate that versatility?
We did have to spend a lot of time optimizing and going back and forth on hold positions in order to ensure we pass the strength requirements. Because if you look at the cage, it looks like Swiss cheese. Mm-hmm. And so in order to get the fatigue strength just right, we had to position the holes very, very carefully and a lot of finite element analysis.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Audrey, thank you very much. Gentlemen, nicely done and good answers to the questions we've had so far. I did get a chance to look at your 510K. I did note that there's a requirement for 3 screws to be used. And that raises a question for me, given that there, I think, are 6 ports for different screws. Do you have any concern, or how do you think about managing graft containment if you fill that whole space? Do you have any concerns about graft coming out? Have you tested that?
So there is a special feature we put into the graft windows that help stabilize the graft. It's not really easily seen, but it's a undercut feature. And the experience that we've had, we've not seen that issue. But yes, you do have multiple screw options that the FDA did require us to put 2 screws, or at least 1 screw in each vertebra, clearly for standalone indication.
When I look at the system, right, to me, it sort of lends itself to a possible sort of single level disposable kit that could be, or even 2 levels, because it looks like your introducer, I don't know if you have a special reamer, but have you thought about that to make things easier for the ASC or surgery center?
Great suggestion, as was all of the other suggestions. That's something we could think about as a Gen 2 kind of consideration. Right now, what we're doing is raising funds to expand our distribution next year. And that's
another clinical issue that comes to mind is how you think about the training, because you've already talked a little bit about access, the need for access surgeons, the need for spine surgeons, neurosurgeons, and who do you think is the critical part in that pathway as your primary target? Because you're going to have to train the access surgeons, I think.
We're fortunate, again, ATP is a very understood approach. Supine positioning, the value proposition of it in terms of being able to reconstruct the sagittal alignment of the spine better than any other position is very well understood. And Dr. Taramani's innovations in the technique have really lend itself well to being something that's very easy to teach. So we're pretty excited about where we can go on even on a small company budget.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now it's time to turn to the audience. Audience, what do you think? You have the chance to now vote. And from what you've heard, you can vote on whether you think this technology and approach is going to be a winner and a game changer, or down at the bottom, whether they need to go back to the drawing board. So you have about 30 seconds to register your vote. We'll wait here for a moment. The results will come in, and then we'll talk about the results. Fantastic. Well, there seems to be a little more than half of the audience thinks this is really going to be a game changer, and the other quarter thinks it could change the standard of care. Fortunately, there's few there's few that think you really need to go backwards and get working again from the beginning. So we now have an opportunity to just quickly go around once more to each of our esteemed panelists, and I'm going to go in reverse order this time, and I'm going to let Audrey have the first question.
Thanks, Scott. Maybe a question in here somewhere, but maybe some advice, and just picking up off of some of the other questions from tonight. I'm not totally sure if we have a number of niches we can satisfy with this product in terms of indications, or if it's more like an all-comer type of product. So I think some real clarity on that in terms of the patients that surgeons, would use the device on, and then, making sure that they know how best to use it in each of the cases that you're laying out. So maybe there's something you want to add about that, but that's kind of my feel and looking at. I think it's got a great potential, and I'm excited to hear what happens with it. But maybe just that little tuning in.
Can I address that, Raymond?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're seeing, as we discussed with surgeons, that obviously a large number of patients that are being fused now are being fused with transforaminal approaches. There is now, with the large number of cases, there's an even larger tide of revisions that need to be done, and posterior revisions through the transforaminal approach are very daunting. So we have a large amount of interest from people who are traditional transforaminal surgeons that want to use this approach to do their revision. So the revision wave is coming in, and we hope to carry on that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Tony, let's turn to you.
Well, thank you, Scott. I would comment here that I think the technology in the business has a great deal of potential. And this potential, I believe, can be actualized if you collect the data that demonstrates where the technology has superior benefits. Not equivalent, but superior. And I think you can do that in secondary surgeries where you have to go to the level above or the level below, and there's already been a primary anterior approach. This kind of technology can be especially valuable in that application. And this gives the in to the door in the physician's mind, the distributor's mind, the payer's mind, and the provider's mind.
And Mike Sherman?
Just a comment. I appreciated the presentation and didn't appreciate maybe what is the key value proposition, which is the versatility of the implant and the approach, and allowing a surgeon to sort of maybe even make not audibles during the procedure. Obviously, they know what they're going to start out doing, but have some versatility within the procedure to adjust their plan a little bit. So I think that's really an interesting concept. No question, just a comment.
I totally agree about the audible comment, and that's what the surgeons would say. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And I'll wrap it up, not so much with a clinical comment, but maybe a cadaveric comment. And as I think about the complexity associated with obtaining clinical data, yet the value thereof, you might be able to find some advantage in speed of access, speed of surgery, speed of exposure that you can do in a cadaveric study with surgeons side by side. And that can become a paper that you publish in terms of speed of access. This addresses, it draws upon some of the points that each of my panelists brought up, and Tony in particular, about the value. With so many different cages systems out there, it's not enough to be me too. You got to have an angle, no pun intended, to what you can do, but you have to have an angle to your benefit. And if you can say, hey, we saved 20 minutes in access time, that translates to money, and that translates to buyers' interest at the hospital. So I'd encourage you to think about that. Getting clinical data is a long, arduous process. Doing a cadaver lab over a weekend with 10 specimens, you can get that data pretty quickly.
Great idea. Thank you.
Invite me to the lab if you have it. I'd love to see it.
Okay,
So,
we will.
Keep that in mind. So thank you, Ray. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mike. This was really a very interesting presentation. If anybody in the audience wants to contact NovApproach directly, the information is going to be coming up on the screen. You can find them on the web as well. So thank you, gentlemen.